I never thought my life would come to this point, sitting in this cramped, cold nursing home room on my own birthday, feeling more invisible than ever. My name is Elaine, and I'm 68 years old. For nearly 5 decades, I poured every ounce of my strength, time, and love into my family, especially my daughter, Linda. I sacrificed dreams, friendships, and even my own well-being to keep everything together, hoping for a moment of appreciation, a glimpse of the love I gave. But here I am, forgotten on my birthday, with only the ticking of the clock and the hum of the fluorescent light to keep me company. Looking back, the sacrifices I made were numerous and deeply personal. When Linda was born, I was still trying to start my career as an artist. I had dreams of painting, of showing my work in galleries, but I put the brushes down. I took a steady job at a local diner to provide a stable income. I worked 2 shifts some days, left sketchbooks unopened, exhibitions missed. The hungry eyes of the art world faded as I took on the role of full-time mother and caregiver. Another sacrifice was my social life, or whatever was left of it after years of motherhood. I refused invitations, declined weekend trips, skipped vacations because someone always needed me at home. Whether it was staying up late nursing fevers, helping with homework, or attending every school event, I was always there, invisible, but indispensable. I pushed away friends who didn't understand why I couldn't come out, why my world revolved around others and never around me. The third sacrifice was even more personal. I gave up the possibility of a relationship for companionship or love beyond my family. Every time someone approached me with kindness or interest, I pulled back. I told myself that my family needed me, that I couldn't afford distractions or divided attention. Loneliness settled in like a quiet shadow, but I normalized it, thinking that was just my lot in life, that love was a one-way street, flowing from me to them. Over the years, I stopped listening to what I needed emotionally. I ignored the swelling ache of loneliness, the longing for recognition, the desire to just be seen for who I was. Not just the mother or the caretaker, but Elaine, the woman with dreams and feelings. I neglected my health, my hopes, and my own happiness. I told myself that was normal. It was love, after all. And doesn't love demand sacrifice? Financially, things didn't get easier. My ex-husband left us early on, abandoning responsibility without a backward glance. Linda grew up, got married, and then life moved too fast. Bills piled up as I aged, with no savings, no pension to fall back on. I depended on Social Security and the occasional help from relatives who lived too far or were too preoccupied to remember me often. Every penny felt tight, every medical bill a strain. I sold what little I had of sentimental value over the years, just to keep the lights on in my apartment. Outsiders saw me as the kind woman who gave everything to her family, someone who deserved admiration and respect. They saw a devoted mother and grandmother. But I looked in the mirror and saw a tired, diminished version of myself, one who had faded away, quietly, piece by piece, swallowed by years of giving without receiving, of living for others while losing herself. My reflection seemed to ask, where is the woman who once dreamed of bright colors and freedom? Two memories stand out, haunting me in their vividness and the sharp contrast they hold to my present state. The first was at Linda's high school graduation. I worked 3 jobs that summer just to save for a modest party. I remember the thrill of watching her walk across the stage, the joy bursting in my chest, the pride that warmed my tired hands. But even then I was exhausted, my hands cracked from hours of scrubbing floors and washing dishes. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone among the decorations, wondering if my sacrifices were truly worth this moment of fleeting happiness. The second memory was more recent, just a year ago, when Linda and her husband announced they were expecting a baby. The joy should have been mine. Instead, I felt a strange mix of happiness and dread. I helped prepare the nursery, bought tiny clothes on a tight budget, but I also felt a creeping fear in my heart. Would I be left behind again? Would this newest miracle bring me closer or push me further away? Physically, my home, a small, dimly lit apartment filled with faded furniture and forgotten mementos, tells the story of my life's slow decline. The peeling wallpaper matches the peeling layers of my spirit. The worn-out armchair in the corner, stained from spilled cups of tea, holds my tired body more often than not, and the ticking clock on the wall counts down the moments that feel heavier each day. Now, sitting in my nursing home room, a sterile place smelling faintly of antiseptic and steamed vegetables, I look out a window at a world that seems to have moved on without me. The thin mattress beneath my aching bones, the dull hum of distant televisions, and the recurring footsteps of nurses remind me daily how much I have been pushed to the edges. I gaze at the little calendar taped on the wall. Today is my birthday. No cards, no calls, no visitors arrived. I tucked away the hurt as usual, blaming myself for being unnoticed again. Despite everything, a small ember inside me still flickers, though dim, waiting for something beyond the relentless, giving and quiet suffering. For years I carried the weight of others' dreams. But maybe, just maybe, there's a chance for my own life to begin again. The moment I recognized the pattern, it was as if a veil lifted, exposing a raw and painful truth that had been hiding in plain sight all my life. Standing on the edge of that night, the weight that had pressed down on my shoulders for decades suddenly felt unbearable, and yet strangely light. My body trembled as if waking from a deep sleep. Each breath was shallow but filled with a fierce intensity, the kind of clarity that hits so hard you need to stop and steady yourself. I realized then that the years I'd devoted to others had drained me of all energy, all identity. I'd been giving endlessly, unquestioningly, and giving had become a cage, not a gift. I sat on a park bench under the dim yellow glow of an old street lamp, the city's distant murmurs fading into a hush that mirrored the stillness inside me. For the first time, I saw clearly how I had been trapped in a cycle of exploitation, a pattern that wasn't just in my family or my marriage. It was inside of me. I thought about how I had eroded my own worth by surrendering my needs and desires again and again, convincing myself that my role was to serve and sacrifice, no matter the cost. The truth I faced was harsh. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually depleted. In my long silence, I had numbed the part of me that longed for respect, for love, for appreciation. Basic needs like feeling valued, seen, heard, all had been neglected. In trying to be everything for everyone, I'd lost sight of who I was beyond those roles. My thoughts swirled fast as a flood of memories washed over me. I remembered the moment 5 years ago when I left my job, the one I had trained so hard for, a career that once filled me with pride and hope. I told myself I did it to support my husband's relocation and our children's schooling. Back then it felt right, almost natural. But now, I could see the tiny fractures it caused, the first cracks in my soul's foundation. I hadn't just given up a paycheck. I had cast aside a piece of my own identity, and I hadn't mourned it properly. Instead, I had buried it beneath daily tasks and responsibilities. Another memory pressed forward. A birthday dinner 2 years ago, when my husband barely glanced at me amid the flood of guests. Laughter echoed, plates clattered, drinks fizzed, but I was unnoticed. A ghost in the room I'd worked hard to maintain. I smiled politely, laughing at jokes, yet I felt my heart implode, silently. That night crystallized what I now understood. I no longer existed to them as a person, but as an invisible backdrop to their lives. My surroundings reflected my inner world. A small, dimly lit apartment, with threadbare curtains and walls stained by time and neglect. The worn armchair where I sat weighed down by years of fatigue, a physical emblem of my drained spirit. The air was heavy with the scent of stale coffee and old books, comforting in their familiarity but also reminders of how little I had changed my space or myself. As I traced the outline of the armrest with trembling fingers, I remembered the countless evenings I had literally sat in that chair, sinking deeper into invisibility. The faint hum of the street outside was a stark contrast to the storm inside me, a war between habitual resignation and a newly sparked will to fight. For a long time I had told myself that enduring was strength, that sacrificing was love. But the truth was bitter. Enduring was silently dying, and sacrificing without boundaries was losing myself piece by piece. My value wasn't tied to how much I could give, but who I was beneath all that giving. The clarity sharpened into determination. A gentle but unwavering voice inside me whispered, "You deserve more. You are more." Rising from the chair, I felt the beginnings of resolve harden my spine. It was the first time in years I felt a flicker of genuine hope. Not naive optimism, but the cautious glimmer of a woman recognizing her worth and beginning to reclaim it. Walking back through the quiet streets, I replayed moments from my past with new eyes. The times I'd overlooked cruelty disguised as gratitude, the small betrayals hidden in casual dismissals, scenes once brushed off as normal, now revealed as abuse by neglect. But with this new perspective came less bitterness than relief. At last I understood. I wasn't crazy or weak. I had been invisible because I allowed that invisibility. But not anymore. Pain didn't vanish. It lingered like a scar raw beneath the surface. But alongside it, a fierce seed of power took root. I took slow, deliberate breaths, savoring each one like it was fresh air after a long winter. Each breath was a reclamation of self, a quiet affirmation. I belong. I matter. The night deepened, quieting the city and my restless mind. But inside, a new journey had begun. One from invisibility toward presence, from resignation toward courage. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The path forward was filled with uncertainty and fear, but also strength and possibility. As I unlocked the door to my apartment, I felt the heavy weight of years pressing against the frame. But tonight, I stepped inside differently, with a promise etched into my heart. No longer would I be the woman who sacrifices everything and ends up nothing. No longer would I be the invisible shadow in her own life story. This was my moment of awakening, the moment I chose to see myself, to honor myself, and most importantly, to fight for myself. And from this moment onward, the woman I once lost would begin to rise. The day after the party, I woke up with a strange mix of dread and resolve twisting inside me. The night's humiliation still gnawed at the edges of my mind, but beneath the pain, something firmer had taken root. I no longer wanted to be the one who vanished into the background, swallowed by the needs of others. Today, I decided I would break the silence. I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the kitchen. The first sip was sharp, a jolt to the senses. I sat at the cracked table, my hands wrapped tightly around the warm mug, grounding myself. The apartment was still quiet, but unlike before, the stillness no longer felt suffocating. It was an empty room waiting to be filled with my own voice. I thought about the people in my life, the ones who had taken so much without ever asking how I was doing. The patterns ran deep. I had played my role perfectly, patient, accommodating, always shrinking. Changing that wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. Slowly, I mapped out a plan, not a loud declaration or confrontation, but a quiet, deliberate act of refusal. I wouldn't scream or storm out. Instead, I would set boundaries, small but firm, that made clear I was no longer willing to be invisible or a doormat. My first step involved the unpaid favors and endless errands I had been running for my husband's family and some acquaintances. I decided to say no to a request their way that afternoon. A simple, "I won't be able to help this time." It felt like a tiny spark, a single word, yet it was loaded with defiance. When the call came from my sister asking me to pick up yet another item, I surprised myself. In calm, measured tones, I said, "I can't today." The silence on the other end was palpable, a stunned pause hanging in the air. "Are you sure?" She pressed weakly, as if testing the waters. "Yes, I'm sure," I replied, my voice steady, even. No explanation, no apology. Disconnecting felt like the first exhale after holding my breath for years. The day unfolded with a strange lightness as I resisted falling back into old habits. Each no was a notch in my newfound armor. I noticed how others shifted uncomfortably around me. Where once they took my compliance for granted, now they faced uncertainty. There were no arguments or harsh words at first, only disbelief. Later, when my husband called, I kept the conversation brief and refused to fall into my usual pattern of over-explaining and placating. He asked why I was acting differently, his voice laced with confusion and accusation. I said firmly, "I'm setting boundaries. I need to focus on myself for a change." For a moment, silence. Then he asked sharply, "Since when do you care about yourself more than us?" That hit, but I took a breath and held my ground. It's been a long time coming. I hung up feeling lighter yet wary, like walking a tightrope with no safety net beneath. That evening I found an old box of belongings stored away in the closet, a dusty wooden chest filled with tokens from years ago. I pulled out a faded photo album. Flipping through pages felt like tracing the outline of a life lived mostly for others. The images were snapshots of family gatherings, school plays, anniversaries, moments where my own desires were invisible. One photograph caught my eye. A picture of me smiling tentatively at a friend during a trip I had once skipped to care for someone else. That neglected friendship had faded quietly, swallowed by my absence. I closed the album gently and reached into the box again, this time pulling out a delicate silver necklace I had received as a gift long ago, but never worn. Its chain was tangled, dull. Holding it, I felt the weight of years I had hidden myself. I placed the necklace around my neck and caught my reflection in the mirror. Something in me shifted. This wasn't just an accessory. It was a symbol, a small, quiet reminder that I belonged to myself now. Night came, wrapping the city in shadows. Instead of retreating to the usual numbness, I stretched out on the floor, taking deep, deliberate breaths. Each inhale a thread weaving me back into myself, each exhale shaking off the weight of others' expectations. Doubt whispered at the edges. Was I being selfish? Would I lose the family and life I'd worked so hard to build? But the fear was smaller now, edged out by a fierce determination. I reminded myself that self-care wasn't selfish. It was survival. The next morning, I set small but clear changes into motion. I moved my things around the apartment to create a small, quiet corner, a personal sanctuary for reflection and growth. The act of rearranging was physical and symbolic, taking control of my space, carving out room for the me lost under years of obligation. I noticed my body relaxing, shoulders easing from their habitual slump. For the first time in decades, I felt an inkling of peace not bought with sacrifice or silence. Despite the peaceful morning, a moment of hesitation froze me briefly when I received a text from a friend who had noticed my changed demeanor. The message was casual. "You okay? Things seem different." For a split second, I felt the urge to retreat, to explain and soothe. But instead, I typed, "I'm starting to choose myself." Sending that message was like breaking through a barrier, soft but irrevocable. By the end of the week, a delicate shift was happening. I was no longer just a silent presence in others' lives. I was re-emerging, cautiously, but unmistakably. The necklace caught the light each morning, a flicker of silver that mirrored the growing strength inside me. Every quiet no, every small boundary was a brick in a new foundation, a life rebuilt from center, not edges. And while the journey was far from over, this first step, the calm, resolute action to stop shrinking, felt like the beginning of a long-awaited liberation. The woman who had vanished in the background was starting to stand tall, and she was ready to be seen. The backlash started almost immediately after my quiet but resolute stand. Calling it fierce would be an understatement. Within hours, my phone began to ring non-stop. Each call was a jab, some seething with anger, others dripping with guilt-tripping sorrow that felt engineered to weaken me. Messages flooded my inbox, a barrage of, "Come back to us," "We can fix this," and "You don't understand what you're doing." But beneath the polite veneer, the tone was clear. I had crossed a sacred line. Chad, my husband, led the charge with his voice sharp and relentless on the phone. "Margaret!" he spat through gritted teeth one evening. "You're tearing this family apart. How could you think you have the right to behave this way? You're being selfish, a word I never imagined would describe you." His attempts to argue were peppered with threats veiled as warnings. "You think pulling rent on the property we all live in isn't going to have consequences? Think again." He wasn't just talking about money. He wanted me back beneath his thumb. Amanda, our daughter, sent countless texts, some tearful, some filled with frustration. Just when I thought ignoring her would make it stop, she showed up unannounced at the small apartment I'd rented. I wasn't ready to face her. But there she was, standing in the doorway, rain dripping from her coat, eyes red from crying. "Mom, please," she begged. "We're hurting. We don't understand why you do this to us after everything." Looking at her, exhaustion and years of hurt bouncing between us, I found the courage to speak plainly. "Amanda," I said softly, "it's never been about money or punishment. It's about respect, the very thing you and your father refused me for too long." Her mouth quivered, but no words came. The silence between us was heavy. Chad doubled down in other ways. He sent emails not only to me but also to my lawyer, trying to intimidate through legalese and empty threats. "You'll regret this," one email warned, "if you continue down this path of selfishness and cruelty." At the neighborhood gatherings, whispered rumors began to spread. Suddenly I was the greedy widow, the cold-hearted mother. Social media wasn't kind either. Posts appeared blaming me for destroying the family and abandoning those I'd cared for all my life. I refused to engage. Each abusive message, angry confrontations, and guilt-laced pleas became bricks in the wall I was building, walls of self-respect and boundaries I'd never set before. Still, the emotional weight was crushing. I ached for the family I once had, but knew that was a chapter now closed. They tried different tactics. Chad's voice on one call was heavy with false remorse. "Margaret, can't we talk? Please don't make this permanent. You're hurting all of us." The guilt was a weapon, sharper than any harsh words, and Amanda tried a gentler approach. "Mom, we just want our family back. Can't you find it in yourself to forgive us?" I stood firm. My resolve was forged in years of neglect and silence. I remembered how I had been invisible, walked over, and taken for granted. This wasn't betrayal. It was liberation. Isolation crept in. Friends who once seemed supportive now kept their distance, uncomfortable with the rift that had grown too wide. Doubt gnawed at me during quiet nights. Was I too harsh? Had I alienated everyone permanently? Memories played back. Moments I'd swallowed tears, hid sadness, and pretended everything was fine to keep the peace. But the peace came at too great a cost. My only solace was creating new routines, new boundaries, small but vital acts like changing my phone number, blocking their calls when they became tests of my strength. I refused to be pulled back into the pattern of living in service to others' demands. One encounter surprised me deeply. An old friend, once a steadfast supporter, confronted me quietly at a local store. "Are you sure you're doing the right thing?" he asked, eyes searching mine. Sometimes forgiveness is about more than just setting rules. His words stung. I realized that even those closest to me struggled to understand my need for change. I'm no longer the woman who sacrificed everything to keep others comfortable. I said steadily. I owe it to myself now. I'm choosing peace over pain. Step by step I rebuilt. Every boundary I established was a declaration. I am no one's doormat anymore. Each ignored message, unanswered call, and calm refusal to engage with manipulation empowered me a little more. The retaliation tried to break me, but it only illuminated my strength. Where once I felt invisible, now I stood, visible and undefeated. The family that had relied on my sacrifice learned they couldn't have my compliance anymore, and there was power in that truth. This was no longer about maintaining a broken system of demands and sacrifices. It was about carving out space for my worth, my peace, my life. There was loneliness in this fight, yes, but also the taste of freedom, the unmistakable flavor of self-respect finally reclaimed. I was beginning to understand. Sometimes breaking free means enduring the storm alone at first. But the sun will rise on the other side, where I stand whole and unafraid. The weight of those last conversations still clung to me like a suffocating fog as I stepped into the attic, a place long untouched and forgotten. I was searching for nothing in particular, just a distraction from the relentless pounding in my chest, caused by the relentless pressure to surrender to the voices that wanted me back under their control. That's when I saw an old, battered box hidden under a pile of faded quilts. Its lock was sour, the hinges creaked, but inside I found something that would change everything. The envelope at the top was thick with age, edges curled and stained, a stark contrast to the sterile digital messages that had haunted my recent days. My name was written in an unfamiliar script, the ink blurred but still legible. I hesitated, fingers trembling. Slowly I peeled it open and unfolded a letter that had nestled in silence for decades. "My beloved," it began, and immediately a flood of emotions surged through me. Curiosity, dread, sorrow, and a hint of something unexpected, hope. The letter was from my late mother, written long ago but never sent. She unmasked truths I was never prepared to hear. My father, the man I had resented so deeply for abandoning me, for the empty spaces he left in my life, had not simply walked away out of selfishness or failure, as I'd been told and had believed for years. There were forces, threats, betrayals that forced his hand. My mother wrote of fear, protection, and sacrifice, a secret she bore alone. As I read her words, the years of hurt and self-blame twisted inside me. The sacrifices I made, giving up my career, living on the edge of poverty, setting aside my own dreams, all felt suddenly different. Not wasted, but misunderstood. The erasure of my father's presence wasn't neglect. It was a shield. Tears blurred the ink, but I pressed on, absorbing every line. The letter revealed betrayals not just between people, but between promises and truths. My mother's silence, a thick veil of protection, had shielded me, even as it burdened me unknowingly. I always told myself that I had been the one sacrificed, But truly, I had been preserved. The letter went on to detail moments I never knew about. A meeting at midnight, a promise broken, a life hidden away to keep another safe. It redefined my past in ways I wasn't ready to fully grasp, but was desperate to understand. The betrayal I thought I had suffered was only one layer of a deeper, tangled web. Once I finished reading, I sat stunned. The letter lay crumpled in my hands, the fragile paper thin as the veneer of certainty I had clung to all these years. My chest ached, but beneath the hurt, there was a slow blossoming of light, an unburdening. Suddenly the attic felt both smaller and lighter. The dusty air, once oppressive, now seemed to carry a promise of change. I thought back to a memory of my mother, sitting quietly by the window, the soft glow of dusk framing her tired face as she told me stories. Back then, I never understood the sadness behind her eyes, the weight of the secrets she bore alone. Another memory flashed, the last time I confronted my closest confidant before our rift, accusing her of betrayal and mistrust. I had been blind to her own struggles, to the invisible chains binding her. Now that moment softened in my mind, replaced by understanding and a reluctant forgiveness. We were all pawns in a game we hadn't fully seen. That night, alone in my small kitchen with only the letter's fading words around me, I wrestled with waves of grief, anger, and relief. This revelation didn't shatter me. It freed me. It shattered the narrative of blame I had internalized and replaced it with a new story, one where I was not a mere victim, but a survivor awakening. I realized how many times I had been pressured, guilted into submission by those around me. The calls, the visits, the cruel questions. They sought to pull me back into old patterns, to make me small again. But now I had a shield forged from truth, a boundary I could hold without shame. As the weeks passed, the letter's impact deepened. I found myself setting new limits, protecting my space in ways I never dared before. The physical tension in my body eased, and the dark corners of my mind cleared, allowing room for hope. This newfound knowledge didn't lock me in bitterness. Instead, it invited me to heal and grow. The complexity of emotions, mixed sorrow, rage, and unexpected tenderness, became part of my strength. I was no longer shackled by silence, but liberated by it. The box remains in my attic, open now. Inside are fragments of my past, but also symbols of my emergence. The brittle paper, worn photos, letters like this one. They are reminders that the truth can shatter illusions, but also clear the path ahead. I am learning that sometimes the darkest betrayals can reveal the brightest truths. And that understanding, even when painful, holds the power to light a way forward. This discovery was not an end. It was a beginning. I am ready now, ready to face what comes with eyes wide open, with a steady heart. The past no longer suffocates me. It has made me whole. I stood frozen at the threshold, the faint creak of the old wooden floor beneath my feet, reverberating through the quiet room. The familiar scent of aged leather mingled with musky cologne. It was a space steeped in memories, both bitter and tender. My heart pounded loudly, as if trying to stamp out the silence that had thickened over years of avoidance. I knew what awaited me inside. The man who had shaped so much of my life, the source of my sacrifices and pain. Today I was no longer the woman who would swallow her voice. Today I would speak, and speak loud. He looked up as I stepped in, eyes narrowing with a mix of surprise and a sly kind of challenge. His posture was rigid, but there was a flicker behind his gaze, a flash of uncertainty that I hadn't seen before. After all this time, when our roles had always been clear and I had been the silent one, the invisible one, now I was standing in front of him, with the weight of truth tethered to my chest. "I never thought you'd have the courage to show up," he said, voice thick with restrained bitterness. "What makes you think you can change anything now?" I drew a steady breath and met his gaze. "I'm not here to ask. I'm here to tell. The years I lost, the secrets you kept, they're coming to light, and I am done pretending." His lip curled in a bitter smile. "You always saw yourself as the victim. Did you believe I was the enemy? You don't see the whole picture. This story you're telling, it's twisted." "No," I said quietly but firmly. "What's twisted is the web of lies you spun to trap me. The truth I found is not just my own. It's a reckoning." For a split second, the man I faced softened like a fading photograph in the rain. Then, the mask hardened once more. "Reckoning? You're being selfish, ungrateful for all I gave." I laughed, bitter, raw. "Give? You mean all you took while I gave myself away? My dreams, my peace, my very life? You think I owe you gratitude for that?" He rose abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor, breaking the fragile tension between us. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. "You think you're above this now? Above me? You're blinded by anger." "No," I answered, stepping closer. "What I feel is clarity. For the first time, I see myself clearly. I am not the woman who stood in the shadows, swallowing pain for the sake of others. I am here, whole, and demanding respect." "You're losing yourself," he spat. "This rage will consume you, and I won't let you drag me down with you." I held his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I am not dragging anyone down. I am pulling myself up." "And you?" I paused, the words sharp but calm, like a knife sliding through years of silence. "You're no longer my anchor or my cage." The room seemed to shrink around us, charged with the weight of unspoken histories. His breathing grew shallow, his composure cracking. I saw the doubt flicker, fleeting and fragile, as though he were a man facing a chasm he never thought he'd be forced to cross. "You were always stubborn," he muttered, voice a low rumble. "Too stubborn to see the truth was buried for a reason. You'll lose everything, chasing shadows." "I'm willing to lose the chains I've lived with," I said softly. "Even if I have nothing else, I'll reclaim myself." He stepped forward, invading my space, his eyes fierce. "You don't know what freedom costs. It's a bitter price. Loneliness, scorn, regret. My cost was silence, invisibility, and pain. I'll pay anything to shed that." I met him eye to eye, steady, unafraid. A long pause settled between us, thick with all the years of sacrifice, betrayal, and muted grief. Then, almost inaudibly, he said, "You think this will all be so simple? That you can walk away and be whole?" "No," I replied, voice low and unwavering. "But it's the beginning. I'll stumble, I'll hurt, but I'll never go back. Whatever comes, I'm choosing my life over the shadows you kept me in." His shoulders slumped as if bearing an unseen weight, his face a mask of defeat and fury entwined. "Then go. Take your truth and leave me to my own." I took a final breath, feeling years of silence breaking like fragile glass within me. "Goodbye," I whispered. "I'm done." I turned away, leaving behind the heavy atmosphere of that room, the prison of lies, manipulation, and lost time. The door closed quietly behind me, signaling the end of a chapter that had defined me for decades. Outside, the sunlight warmed my face, filling me with a strange mixture of relief and raw hope. Around me, the world seemed different, brighter, offering a chance to breathe, to live, to rewrite the narrative by my own hand. I walked forward slowly, aware of the space I was reclaiming with every step. The chains that once bound me were breaking, not with shouts or rage, but with quiet resolve. I was no longer a prisoner of the past, but a woman standing tall in the promise of a future she would finally choose. Tears traced gentle paths down my cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. These were tears of release, the remnants of a long-held hold that had finally loosened. In that moment I understood. Freedom was not about vengeance or anger. It was about peace, about forging a life that honored who I truly was. And as I walked into the light, that life was waiting. Vast, unknown, but unmistakably mine. The first light of dawn filtered softly through the pale curtains, casting long shadows that slowly faded as the sun rose higher. The small apartment around me felt like a sanctuary, a haven I had claimed after years lost in the shadows of others. The walls, freshly painted in a muted cream color, embraced a quiet warmth, and the faint scent of jasmine from the sachets on the windowsill mingled with the crisp morning air. Despite its modest size, this place was my own creation, a reflection of the inner transformation I was living. I sat in the worn but comfortable chair by the window, fingers wrapped around a cup of steaming herbal tea. The steam curled upward, carrying aromas of chamomile and a hint of mint, scents I had chosen deliberately to calm the remnants of old fears and usher in hope. My eyes traced the delicate pattern on the porcelain cup as I breathed deeply, feeling the settled warmth spread through my chest, steadying the rhythm that the years of struggle had nearly broken. On the small table beside me lay an unassuming wooden box, its surface smooth from years of handling. Inside it rested a single fragment, a jagged piece of the mirror I had shattered the day I decided that silence was no longer an option. That moment had marked a turning point, a symbolic breaking of the past that had confined me. Now, touching that shard every morning was both a reminder of what I had endured and a talisman for the strength I was reclaiming. The soft chime of my phone startled the quiet. A message from Clara, a neighbor I'd come to know through community workshops, blinked on the screen. "Coffee tomorrow. I'd love to hear about your new plans." A gentle smile stretched across my face, a small but powerful light in the dawn of my revival. For so long, I had lived in the shadows, unseen, unheard, and defined by my sacrifices. Now, with each new connection, I found myself inching closer to a life that felt real, grounded in mutual care and shared hope. When Clara arrived the next day, she came bearing wildflowers, bright, untamed, and imperfect, just like my journey had been. Their scent filled the room with an earthy sweetness that contrasted the sterile quiet of my old life. We sat close on the faded couch, sharing warmth and stories. There were no dramatic confessions, only genuine conversation, exchanging dreams, fears, and small victories alike. "Nothing grand, just new beginnings," Clara said with a smile as she handed me a steaming cup. I nodded, feeling gratitude swell in a place I thought barren. Here was someone who saw me, not as the woman worn down by years of devotion to others, but as myself, gradually rediscovered and rising anew. Later, when the city around me hushed beneath the blanket of night, I lit a small candle on the windowsill. Its fragile flame flickered, casting gentle shadows that danced with the stillness. I closed my eyes and breathed in the moment, feeling a profound peace, an acceptance not born of forgetting, but of embracing all parts of my story. I thought back to the sacrifices, the silences, the invisible chains that once bound me, and I let them rest without bitterness. They were the roots from which this new self had grown, stronger, wiser, and free. "I choose me," I whispered to the flickering light, a vow as much to myself as to the quiet room. With the candle's glow warming my face, I looked ahead, not to the past or the wounds, but to the vastness of tomorrow. The road would still have hurdles, moments of doubt and inevitable pain. Yet the chains had fallen away, replaced by resilience and hope. This place, this life I was building, was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I was embracing: freedom, self-respect, and love on my own terms. As the flame burned steadily, I smiled softly, knowing deep within me that this was not an ending. It was a dawn, the start of a journey written by my own hand. I was finally home,